So yes, welcome everybody to today's interview, CESI Talks. CESI Talks is a series of interviews we're conducting in the frame of the project, which is called WEP 24, which aims at rising awareness among our members and among the workforce of our members, also for the upcoming European elections, and of course also speak about the benefits, but also the flaws of the European Union. Today, I'm very pleased to be able to welcome Christophe Hansen from the EPP party, from the EPP group, member of the European Parliament, Equester, and member of the Parliament's Bureau, member of the Equesters Bureau, and very importantly and interesting for today's discussion, he's member of the Committee on International Trade. Mr. Hansen, Christophe, welcome.
Good morning.
You know, we are the independent trade unions. As such, of course, we're also having a worried eye on the developments of these past 3 years or 4 years. And now there are increasingly voices which are raised also not only to have some kind of due diligence when it comes to supply chains, but also to kind of support a green transition in international trade. How do you see the balancing of these objectives, so between the green transition on the one hand and the international trade on the other?
Yes, I think it's very imperative to note that we need international trade if we want our green transition to happen as well. And I think that's something we definitely need. We need new energy sources. We need the technologies to produce those energies. And we see that currently we are over dependent not only on the production side, for example, from China comes is producing 76% of global photovoltaic, so solar panels, and of course they have also a lot of critical raw materials that are needed, for example, to have the magnets in our wind mills as well. So we are currently over dependent, and we have very few own resources, let's say, or critical raw materials on the European continent. So we need to get them in, and that's why we have to talk about trade agreements, but as well so-called strategic partnerships on critical raw materials in order to be able to let our industry work as well. And there, of course, we need now to speed up this a little bit, because we know that, for example, battery production is not happening, or almost not happening in the European Union. We need to build this up, and that's why as well the European Commission has launched the so-called Net Zero Industry Act, where we would create so-called green valleys in order to produce and to manufacture as well those technologies that are needed, because, as I said, we are currently over dependent on that. So, of course, also we want our trade to be, let's say, that we want to export our values as well when it comes, for example, for human rights concerns, but also for environmental concerns. So there we are quite ambitious, but we also see that other major economies are not as ambitious. So this is, of course, posing a problem, because we haven't concluded almost in the last 5 years. We just did an agreement with Vietnam, and we did the trade and cooperation agreement with the United Kingdom, but still this is a step back from the initial position. So I think we really need now to get new agreements done in order to become as well less dependent on China.
So you clearly see, of course, international trade as a tool to promote Europe's green industries and technologies.
Definitely, and as I said, we need as well the raw materials to be able to produce those technologies. And that's just something we are often talking about, the open strategic autonomy, but often we forget that the open is very important. We need that we get certain materials in order to be able to produce and then export again and let our economy thrive as well. So there is a lot to be done and to be accelerated as well, if we don't want to lose even further out to the United States, to China, and on those important technologies.
You mentioned it already. The European Union could lead by examples in incorporating, let's say, environmental but also social considerations into international trade policies, international trade agreements in times of, you mentioned it also, of course, of supply shortages, of high energy prices, of energy shortages. Is that something where you really see this is sustainable, realistic for the future, or will we not be depending on basically everything we might get from regardless where?
The issue is, of course, we can be very ambitious on those matters, but we still need to be able to conclude, and we have as well to be aware that in other economies maybe the standards are different. If we are talking about Australia or New Zealand, for example, those are very developed economies, developed countries, so their values are already quite at the same level. So there, with our TSD chapters, trade and sustainable development chapters, we don't have an issue there. But when you would go, for example, to Southern America or other economies that are maybe a little bit less developed, there we will face problems, and as well we have to be aware they need to first have the economic development, and then they can realize certain other objectives. But nonetheless, all our trade agreements have this trade and sustainable development chapters, where as well there are clear rules that for example, the International Labour Organization core conventions need to be ratified as well, so that trade unions, for example, could gather that the freedom of press is guaranteed, etc., etc. So these are very important conditions that we are setting in our trade agreements.
Going different path in international trade policies, are these also, let's say, lessons learned from TISA or TTIP or the CETA discussions we had, let's say, 7 or 8 years ago?
Well, I think with CETA we had a little bit less of that concern, but nonetheless, when you would go, let's say, to an African country, there of course there is way more to do, and we don't want to do the same thing that the Chinese are currently doing. So they are being everywhere. They are giving. They are not asking about much on quality, on environmental quality or labor standards. So for the partner countries, that's easy. So I wouldn't say that it is a lesson learned from TTIP. TTIP, of course, we know that the United States is a very developed economy. But there, of course, there were requests by both sides that were just not compatible. So I think that's a little bit different. What we are now doing, we have made a lot of our independent tools, and one of them I was rapporteur for that. That's the so-called deforestation regulation. And there we aim to get our supply chains free of, let's say, goods that have caused deforestation. So those are agricultural goods that have been produced on areas where the rainforest, for example, has been cut down. So we are just saying we are not taking those goods in anymore, and thereby we want as well to set a global standard on that. So and I think that is a very important step forward, because we are losing every year 10 million hectares of forests, and over 10% is caused by our European consumption in goods like chocolate, like soy, like palm oil, wood, cow meat, etc. So we have really there set an high ambition, and we see that now the United States, for example, is looking as well on what are we doing and is it working in practice, and if we could send, let's say, serve as a blueprint for the United States on that, we would make a huge step forward.
Final question to you, Mr. Hansen. Next year, 2024 European elections, what would be your message to the citizens, to the workers?
My message would be to take a step back and see as well a lot of files we are discussing currently in the European Parliament are just adding layers and layers and layers of complexity and requirements to our companies, to our farmers, etc. And I think we need to take a breath. And this, the current European Commission in my opinion, has overloaded a little bit the ship with new regulations, and a lot of citizens just feel overwhelmed by a lot of new requirements. They serve, of course, objectives like our fight against climate change, against biodiversity loss, etc. But nonetheless, we need as well that people can breathe, especially after this multi-crisis that we have gone through with the war in Ukraine, with the COVID, etc. So I think we have really to give our people as well the chance to breathe. So please, for your members, I think it is important to see and take a little bit a step back to see what is populism and what are populist requests and what is really feasible. And I think there it is good to have not just an approach that is on focusing on targets, but as well on the means to realize those targets.
So getting informed also, and of course, going to vote. Mr. Hansen, many thanks. All the best to you in the coming years. And I hope to see you soon again in person at the European Parliament. Much appreciated.
Perfect. Thank you very much and have a nice day.
You too. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.